Conversations with Phil. Business advice without the BS. Just straight talk and frank conversations to help you grow your business by teaching you to get more leads, earn more referrals, and close more business.
Hey, so today I get to talk to my fellow National Speaker Association pal, Ruth Ross, who is passionate about employee engagement like I am. Author of the new book, Coming Alive, that is about work and life, which I love. And she's telling me she's going to move near me, even though she knows me. I'm kind of concerned, but this is going to be fun. What's up, Ruth?
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I am awesome. How about you?
I'm not stalking you, I promise.
That's okay. I love having friends close. So that's really exciting. As we were talking before we started, you mentioned you're going to move down to St. Petersburg, which is like literally right down the street from me. So talk to me about that.
Well, across the bridge.
Okay.
So I'm here in San Francisco. That's where I'm talking to you from today, which is an amazing city. I've been here almost 20 years, but I've had some changes in my life over the last year that have made me rethink where I am. This is probably the longest I've ever lived in one place. All my family's back on the East Coast where I grew up. And I thought, geez, I don't want to live where there's snow. I kind of like the no state income tax. Got to look at Florida. And I fell in love with the whole St. Petersburg, Tampa area. Just great walkability, beautiful beaches, great people. And so last month I bought a condo. Now the only bad news is it's under development and it won't be ready until 2018. But I'm excited to come there. Then I found out you were there afterwards.
Of course, yeah. No buyer's remorse yet. What do you think?
None. I'm
Okay.
really excited about it.
Cool. Well, I'm excited because we'll get to spend some time together and talk about employee engagement and food. You like food, don't you, Ruth?
Food and wine. I mean, we'll talk about employee engagement while we're having dinner and drinking good wine. That's
Awesome.
engaging. What do you think?
That is a deal for me. That engages me.
Totally. I'm with you.
Cool. So let's talk about employee engagement a little bit because I think it's important as obviously, we love what we do, but not every person does. And
Right.
we know that's true in life, that's true in work, that's true in a lot of things. And that's unfortunate. And so when I got approached by your PR firm to talk about your book, I'm like, Coming Alive. Wow. This is something that we need to hear about. And then I see, it's not just employee engagement, which honestly, I didn't do a good job of research the first time. I'm like, employee engagement, that's important. But then I see it's also about life. And I think having the two, right, is so important because it is really a life-work balance that if we're going to spend 12 hours a day at work, sometimes more, it means when we're having a life, we better be fully alive or we're going to be completely drained. So talk to me about how this book came about.
So sure. So let me start with what I like to call my face in the mirror moment, which happened to me in the fall of 2010. So I was an executive VP of HR for a major financial institution, had a great job, but life was crazy. I mean, we're 2 years into the financial crisis. My company had doubled in size through an acquisition. So anyone who's really smart can kind of figure out who I worked for because there was a really big merger during that time. But literally one day I was getting ready to go to work and I'm sort of at the mirror putting on my makeup and I started screaming in the mirror, when the hell are you going to admit that you're completely dead inside and you just have to stop being a fraud? So I'm having this great one-way dialogue with my mirror, just going, I can't hide this anymore. And I knew at that point I had diagnosed my own disengagement. So that's kind of what started me on this path of saying, wow, it can happen to anyone. It happened to me, even in this great big job. And so that kind of set me on this path. And fast forward 10 months later, I was finally able to kind of orchestrate my departure because I knew at that point that's what was best for me. And I was at a great place in my life where I was able to do it. And part of this goes to what you were just talking about the intersection of work and life. I knew with every fiber of my being that I wasn't there for my husband 100%. because I was wallowing in my own misery of disengagement. And so I knew for us, I needed to leave. So orchestrated that departure. Fast forward about another year, and people started telling me their stories when they heard what I did. And next thing you know, I'm sitting there going, I think I have a book in this. The hardest part for me, besides writing, and as being an author of a book, it's not the easiest thing, but it's a great thing to do. But I'm like, okay, am I writing a business book about how to engage your employees in the workplace? Or am I writing a book about how to re-engage yourself personally in your own life? And then I sort of figured out a way to meld it together and ended up with Coming Alive, the journey to re-engage your life and career. So here I am today.
Wow. It's interesting that when we do that kind of look in the mirror, that so many days, myself included, we look and we're like, yeah, it's okay. I'm just going to be all right with this. And then we have that kind of cataclysmic or not event that it comes and looks at us and like, hey, knock, knock. Hello, pay attention here, right? This is a big deal. So was there something that caused that, do you think, or did it just happen?
I love that question because this is one of my favorite parts to talk about. I think about this as a journey, right? And it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And somewhere along the way, roadblocks can happen. And they can sometimes be really big boulders, right? Like, just something really horrible happened with a boss or with the organization or ethics or whatever it might be. But sometimes it's just the little things that might detour you, right? Like you puncture a tire or you do something. So I kind of refer to them as sort of paper cuts. So if you think about when you get a paper cut, right? So you take your finger, right? You get a paper cut and you don't bleed, but it stings and you cry like a baby, right? Especially if you get something in it like lemon. And then it's like, forget it. It could be a paper cut, like my boss yelled at me today, paper cut. I got a bad performance review, paper cut. The funding for a great project I was really excited about just got cut, paper cut. And so what happens is each one by itself is not a really big deal. But if you start to layer each paper cut on top of each other, then it's actually going to go deeper. And in some ways, you form a hard scar and it may even bleed. And I think that's really what happened with me, where there were things that were just sort of bothering me. And then finally, the deepest paper cut came. And I realized that it wasn't going to heal unless I did something quite different.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I know that as I go through my life, I've had few of those major cataclysmic events, but a lot of those paper cuts, those detours, those roadblocks, whatever you want to call them, right? They help shape us and shift us a degree or two, but that takes us in a completely different path than we would have had we had that cataclysmic event that shifted us 180, because often we end up, I think, shifting back once that event is over. It takes some time, but I think, I don't know, what do you think about that, Ruth?
Yeah, I agree with you. I like to say that you can switch in a moment from engaged to disengaged. So the analogy I like to use is when we went to a playground when we were a child and there was a seesaw, right? So we're of the age that we actually remember going to playgrounds, yep, right? Having those things. And so the great thing about a seesaw is you get on and the idea obviously is to go up and down and have some sort of balance. And at one point, somebody can be soaring high and the other person's going to crash and kind of hit their butt on the ground. And so there's the fluidity to engagement. And so at some point you can be high and at some point you can be low. And that's okay. It's all about re-engaging and trying to get yourself to that point where you can go up and down. When disengagement sets in is when you realize that everything's at that low. And then no matter what you do, it's not going to go back up to that high. And so you got to get off the seesaw. And that's sort of my analogy on this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, if we're unable to move, if we're stuck in that rut, that ends up in quicksand. That sucks us in worse. And I've been there. I've certainly felt that. I hate that feeling. And often that's when you almost have to leap out of that muck to make that big change. Even though nothing large caused it, we just continue to sink down further. And unless we do stand up, it's gonna overwhelm us.
Yeah, what happens, I couldn't agree more, because what happens with that quicksand is your feet can't find solid ground, right? So you're constantly shifting and the sands are shifting under you. And then as you start to sink lower, it starts to come up and kind of choke you, right? So you can't call out. And what you're trying to do is grab on to a lifeline, like looking for a branch, looking for something that you can hold on to and say, okay, this is safety. And sometimes what happens when you're really disengaged is you feel like you can be invisible, even in a very visible role. And so you're in that quicksand and you think maybe you're speaking out, but nobody's really hearing you to come and throw you that lifeline. It's a really horrible feeling. And, I want to go back to, if you don't mind, to pivot a little bit back where you were talking about this intersection of work and life. That is so important to me because honestly, you can't compartmentalize your life. You just can't. What happens at home affects you at work. What happens at work affects you at home. So if you're going through something where maybe you're going through stresses of a bad relationship or financial issues or childcare or whatever the case may be, when you get dressed in the morning, that stress gets dressed with you and goes into the office. Or conversely, if you're dealing, like I had a bully boss, well, I had many bully bosses, but the last one, he'd do something and I'd come home and I'd bring that home. And, I'd come home from work and my husband would be, hey, don't cook tonight. Let's go out for a romantic dinner. And I'd be like, can you order Thai food? Because I don't even feel like eating dinner. I'm just going to go watch TV. Right? I bring it home with me. So you cannot separate those two things.
Yeah, it's so true. I think we try to do that because we think that if we have something stable, that the unstable is going to be better. But I find when I have one foot on a banana peel, it doesn't matter where my other foot is. I'm still sliding around and not feeling any better, even if I think it might be better.
You need a landing spot. Well, I think the first thing that has to happen when you realize that you're disengaged, or maybe somebody else told you, but I actually provide a self-assessment quiz in my book so that people can figure it out for themselves as well. But there's really three things that happen. So when I had that big face in the mirror moment, I could have done three things. One, I could have just acknowledged it and said, you know what, I can't leave right now, not a time I can do something. But at least let's be honest about something and call it what it is. Or I could have gone and spoken to my boss, or maybe gone to someone else like an HR or colleague or someone and said, you know what, I'm feeling myself not having quite that spark that I should have. I call it job sculpting. Is there something we can do to tweak? So I was in human resources for 30 years. I supported the same client group for 10 years. Maybe if I went and supported a different part of the business, could that have given me the spark to sculpt, to re-engage? Or the third thing was that I literally looked and said, I have nothing to be ashamed about. I've had this great career. I've done really everything I've wanted to do. I think I am at a point where this just isn't my passion anymore. I need to go figure out what that is. So I didn't leave tomorrow. You never want to just run from something that's not working. You want to walk towards something better and be thoughtful and planful and strategic. So it took me some time. And in my case, it was about 10 months before all the stars lined up and I was able to walk away.
That's great advice. I love the idea of job sculpting, especially because often we have a big, massive job. And if we could sculpt that and maybe reposition just a few things, we can often see much greater success and that re-engagement, because it could just be the people that we're serving. It could just be, the repetitiveness, the over and over, the death by that 1,000 cuts in the same exact spot, Or it could just simply be that you need a new challenge. And often today isn't the right time. It might be tomorrow. It might be, as you said, 10 months, whenever that is. But the key is still to contribute, because if we don't, we find that, at least I've found, when I'm not contributing, I feel even more worthless and even more disengaged. So I want to find a way to re-engage, to reconnect. And often that job sculpting has helped me. I didn't even know what I was doing, but I would ask for, oh, can I do more of this and less of this? For instance, I don't like to do reports. So whenever possible, I would find someone that does like to do reports to do those reports, because I love to do the analysis and then the reporting out on those. But the actual minutia of the Excel spreadsheet, not so much for me. So I think that's great advice. And those 3 tips in Ruth's book, Coming Alive, with the self-assessment, make this book, even if that's all someone picks up, just a great tool for getting back and getting through the stuckness.
Yeah, I think it's about looking in the mirror. I remember I was doing this great talk last month in Phoenix, and I don't know why this came into my head, but right before I left to get on the plane, as I'm finishing up my packing, I took one of these $3.99 hand mirrors that I had lying around my apartment, and I stuck it in my suitcase. And as I'm doing the conversation, I said to people, the greatest tool that you need in business today is not a technology tool. Now, I know I'm saying that to the king of technology over here, right? And while there's many great things, so I said, here's the best tool you can buy. And I held up this $3.99 big hand mirror, right? And people just cracked up. But I said, here's why. Because we always have to allow ourselves to look in that mirror and really assess what's going on. That is the best way to kind of have the greatest journey you can have, is at certain points, you want to take a breath, you want to pause, and you want to reflect on where you've been, and then you want to recalculate where you need to go on this journey. And what better thing than a mirror? And be honest about it. Yeah. So that's my new thing now. So I think I have to bring that to every talk.
I do think that's great, because here's the thing. We often get wrapped up in those technology tools. We often think that we're going to tech our way out of this.
Right.
And frankly, it's simpler than that. We need to make a hard look. And that $4 mirror is so powerful, because we look at that and we're like, it was that easy. It's right there, as opposed to fumbling through an app or, even an assessment. I mean, if we take a hard look, we take 10 minutes and we look at ourselves and we say, so what's really wrong? And we keep asking ourselves why. I think we stand a much better chance of finding it out than trying to use some crazy tool that might be complicated.
And if you take that comment that you just made and tie it back to the workplace, that goes along the same kind of lines. It's not about spending money on programs and perks. That's not the way to get full engagement. It's not rocket science. The solution is really getting back to basics, and it's the basics of connecting, because I truly believe in this day and age, we've lost the fine art of connecting. So one of the things that I talk about and that I created is something that I call the Alive Treatment Plan, hence the title of the book, right? Coming Alive. And the Alive Treatment Plan is really based on the construct of a stay conversation in the workplace. And I really advocate and prescribe that managers twice a year sit down and have a conversation. So if you and I were working together, let's get a cup of coffee. That's about all it will cost, right? Spend an hour, not to do my performance review, not to have a review of my to-do list, but rather just to have a connecting conversation that talks about how are you feeling about work. So the first step in the Alive is the ask. And it's about asking the right questions around things such as, are you sick at the thought of getting up and going to work in the morning? Or are you excited? What's the one thing that's an obstacle that you'd love to see me get rid of? What are you excited about doing in the next 18 to 24 months? Just questions that get at a conversation. The second step in the 5-step Alive is the listen. And by listening, I want you to listen not just to what you hear, but also what you see from your employee, because sometimes the nonverbal body language, if I'm talking with you and you can't even look me in the eye and you're looking down, I better realize that what we're talking about is causing you pain. Conversely, if your eyes light up like bulbs on a Christmas tree, that's something that you're excited about. And as a manager, I need to build off of that. The third step is to identify after the meeting. I kind of go back, look at my notes with my employee, and I say, wow, Phil was really excited when we talked about this new technology that's coming down the pipe. What if I asked him to put together a team to launch the new product? The V stands for validate, where that same week I want the manager and the employee to come back together again to do two things. Most importantly, I want the manager to thank the employee for the conversation and acknowledge that they really appreciated the dialogue. And then to go over those 2 to 3 reaction steps that you've identified to make sure they're the right ones, hence the validation. And the fifth and final step is just execute on the plan. You've had this great conversation, you've connected, you've acknowledged, you're in agreement. Don't blow it by not executing on the plan. If a manager does that twice a year, I guarantee you will have higher engagement scores.
Wow. Simple stuff. I think execution is often where we fall down. And that's the hardest part, right? We can have this great plan, but actually putting it into practice is the hard part. I know that's where I've fallen down as a leader. How do we avoid falling down? How do we avoid the failure to execute, Ruth?
I wish I had the answer to that, honestly. I can just tell you that the more that people get comfortable with this and the more that they see the reaction of their employee and how much more connected they feel, both on a personal and professional level, I think it becomes easier to execute. I also think it's incumbent, though, this isn't just a manager issue. I am truly of the belief that every single one of us needs to be a CEO. And I don't mean chief executive officer, because I don't know about you, but I certainly didn't want that stress. But I think it's really easy for each one of us to be a chief engagement officer and to own our own engagement. And so if I've got a manager and we've had this great conversation and they're not executing, then it's incumbent upon me to go and have a follow-up conversation and say, hey, remember when we talked about doing this project or getting rid of this stumbling block? I'd love to see if we can pick that back up. Simply waiting around for your manager or for senior leadership to do it isn't always going to be the answer. So be a CEO.
I love that. I think, that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book is that reminder that as an employee, that you also hold part of that engagement opportunity. And we often forget that, right? We forget that we need to manage up and we think that it's just the leader that's responsible for engagement. Really, it's an inside job. We have to take that on ourselves and find ways to execute or help that get executed.
Well, that's how you paint the masterpiece of engagement. You have to have the CEO or the C-suite, managers, employees, all really working together to create that painting. Of course, when I talk to HR people, which I speak to HR groups a lot, right? And they say, well, what about us? What about us? You're talking about these 3 people. And I'm like, hey, you got to learn that you can't own this. Now, using that analogy, you might be the paint. You might be the one that goes out and gets the canvas. You might be the one that provides the tools to facilitate that. But it's really up to those 3 other groups to really all own it together. Otherwise, HR is just sort of coming in and saying to the manager, well, you can go on vacation because you don't have to worry about engagement.
Yeah, definitely. But HR does absolutely play a part of that. I mean, the facilitation and enabling the managers and the leaders to have those tools is so important because so many managers don't ever learn this. This is not something that's taught in B school. This is not something, often that people just pick up naturally. This is something that they need to play a part in. And I think that's one of the reasons, Ruth, why Coming Alive is such an important book for folks, because as leaders, as managers, as an employee, you need to pick up this book and you need to really dig deep and own it yourself. hold up the mirror, spend
Right.
the $4, look at it and say, what's going on with me? This is a problem with me, not a problem with the organization, but a problem with me. And I can change, I can sculpt, right? I can do something, but really it's about me owning my own crap.
Absolutely. I will tell you to this day, I am 100% positive and supportive of my former company. I still remain a shareholder. I love them. This was not about the company. This could have happened to me at any of the companies that I worked at. It really is about looking internally. Yes, did my boss contribute to some of that? Without a doubt. Did some other factors contribute? Being on a plane back and forth across the country constantly because of the acquisition. All those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, I have to own how I was feeling and what I was going to do about it. And I'm the lucky one because I now, 4.5 years into this journey, am doing what I'm passionate about and found my calling. Nobody else found that for me. I found that for me.
That's awesome. So you re-engaged, you wrote this great book. So how do people get more of Ruth? Where can they find you?
Ways. I think the easiest thing is to go to my website because, our websites are central point for everything. Mine is actually Ruth K. Ross, so a middle initial K, because I found that there were a lot of Ruth Rosses that wrote about things like pet care and food and others. So I had to kind of distinguish myself. So it's www.ruthkross.com. And on there, you can find information about what I do and get access to my book and other things. And I'm also on Twitter at Ruth K. Ross or on Facebook. So let's connect on social media. I've got a newsletter. You can sign up for it on my website.
Awesome. So staying engaged with Ruth will give you those insights so you can come alive too. So Ruth, my friend, thank you for joining me today. It's been instructive as always and inspiring to remember that engagement is an inside job. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Phil.